This series of videos introduces the 38 chapters of the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. It's a project of the Social Change Lab, and we gratefully acknowledge the support of the Mary Lee bequest for the work of our team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Winifred Lewis. I'm a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a Bachelor of Psychological Science student, year 3 at University of Queensland.
Hi, I'm Tiana Kennedy. I'm a student at UQ.
That's right. And we're all here as part of the project of making videos for the chapters in the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. And in particular, today we're going to talk about chapter 14, which is Animal Rights and Anti-Speciesism. The author's Lyle Monroe, and he's a lecturer at the Monash University and Federation University of Australia. So I guess one question people might have is, what is speciesism? Tiana.
Speciesism is rooted on the construct of human superiority, and that their interests and pleasure is more desirable than treating everyone equal. And I guess that also depends on species. For example, save the whales, don't save the pigs.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess one of the points that Lyle makes in the chapter is that even though there's been a long history of movements to protect animals, that in fact the idea that they would come from an anti-speciesism perspective is relatively recent. Like there's a famous book in 1975 by a guy called Singer, The Animal Liberation, that put forward this idea that we should somehow not be prejudiced in favor of our species, because until then people really took it for granted. And I guess some of the earliest movements were more aimed at protecting animals from cruelty. Zach, do you want to say a little about that?
More into animals of cruelty. So like building on what Tiana says earlier, some animals are treated much better than others. For example, cats and dogs are treated as sacred compared to how we treat cows and other domesticated animals.
Yeah.
So for example, cats and dogs, we will feed them, we will clothe them, we will keep them close to our house. On the other hand, cows, pigs, this kind of wildlife are reared in very poor animal husbandry standards and can be considered animal cruelty.
Yeah.
Just for the sole reason of them being edible.
Yeah, well, that's right. And so really that's been developed according to the author in 3 separate branches of animal rights movements. And one of them was really animal welfare. And so that is about making sure that people don't, wantonly torture and kill animals. So old organizations like the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, typically have as a focus just stopping cruelty from occurring. And then there are new movements of animal liberation that try and address these issues like you're talking about with factory farming and the brutal way that we can treat animals within our kind of consumption systems, that we would consider it legitimate, like battery hens, that they would be kept in very close quarters and with poor health conditions and poor well-being. And then the new kind of movements of animal liberation that sometimes go further and even can embrace violence or property destruction, where they feel like animals shouldn't be imprisoned at all. That it's not just that they should be treated humanely, but that they shouldn't be subordinate to our needs. And I guess when I read about that, it was very interesting learning. And part of the question that comes up is the role of diet. That's something that you were reflecting on, Tiana?
Diet. Yeah, of course you got to be happy and you got to be healthy, and we can achieve that without the use of animals in most societies. There's obviously societies still heavily depend on it, not just for nutritional requirements, but also for economy.
Yeah, and you mentioned how the issue of climate change is actually linked in with vegetarian or meat-eating diet.
Yeah, it was the Australian government data I read, I think might have been mentioned in the chapter, that Australia, 54% of our land, all of our land use is pasture. largely for beef and dairy, which is kind of the same industry, but yeah, that's not sustainable too much.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess that's something that you mentioned as well earlier, Zach, right? That in fact there are animal industries are contributing to the production of carbon emissions.
Yeah. So for one of them, cows are actually one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, just from the methane that they produce from farting.
Yeah.
So due to how much, sorry, give me a moment, due to how much cows are being reared, there's actually a lot of methane being produced.
Yeah. And although
climate change.
It's funny to think about, but it's actually not a laughing matter. It's something that could easily be changed. It's one of the things in human society that we could easily change. But I say that in the context of everyone actually loving to eat meat. That's the problem. So in the last part of the chapter, Lyle talks about how to move forward, and really the two main areas that have a need, for action that he's outlining are moving towards a vegetarian and vegan diet on the one hand, and moving towards stopping the trade in wildlife. And really they're for different motives. So one of the things that he highlights is that for most people, becoming a vegetarian, and I think he's really referring here to the Western context, is often a health choice rather than a moral choice. I don't know if either of you guys wanted to comment on that, or if it's something that we'll just pass on.
Yeah, so he mentioned in the book that, or in the chapter, that most of the diseases can be spread through viruses and pandemics due to poor housing condition of the animals.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned about the avian flu.
Yeah.
So due to how poor the conditions the animals are housed, the virus does spread very fast and basically causes the meat to be unedible.
Yeah.
And if edible, if you choose to eat it, it does lead to a lot of diseases.
Yeah. And so one approach would be to try and have the animals treated humanely, for example, through organic farming and so on. But that's much more expensive, and that's not how our societies are currently predicated. So really, for most people, when you're eating meat, you're participating in inhumane and unhealthy activities. I say that with full disclosure that I do eat meat myself. So I'm not just saying it to badmouth other people, I'm owning the responsibility for that. And then the other issue, of course, is wildlife trade, which has a similar issue around health. And so, we've seen that most recently with the pandemic, but in the past, the wildlife trade has been linked to numerous outbreaks of illness, including in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and elsewhere, right?
Yeah, one of the wildlife trades I was hearing about, it was this year. So in Australia, we commercially kill kangaroos. And because of the lack of hygiene, because they just go out at night and they drag the kangaroos on the back of their truck, it's actually been banned in Russia, the importation of kangaroo, because it is so diseased and there's no way to do it so hygienically.
Wow,
so
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think that's covered in the chapter, but it's just one example that's relevant, isn't it, of what Lyle was talking about in the book. And I guess looking at the final sections, what is one of the things he's saying is it's actually really hard to stop, but more and more people are participating, not just in a vegetarian and vegan diet, but in the environmental movement and in the animal rights movement. So here in Australia, for example, we've got the Animal Justice Party, but all around the world, including in India and China and Brazil and Russia and other countries, new movements are forming, new groups are forming, as well as the existing and older societies. So I guess when I finished reading the chapter, I felt like I'd learned a lot, and it's a bit hopeful and inspiring. But what did you guys think? What did you take from the chapter, Zach?
Well, the main takeaway is that the way we treat animals are kind of biased, and we also don't really treat animals that we eat very ethically. So, for example, about the life traits and the poor living conditions, these things can easily lead to the spread of diseases, and it's not very healthy for us in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. And what about you, Tiana?
I found the structure really interesting, that animal rights was kind of branched into 3 or 4, pretty much, like the extremist, animal rights movement, liberation, and welfare. I think that's quite interesting because that's they have different, what's the word?
Well, different functions and approaches,
Different
really.
functions,
Yeah.
different approaches, and different belief systems
Yeah.
that are fueling that. Yeah.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
are more draconic than others.
Yeah. But it is interesting, isn't it? Because people will often like stereotype the whole environmental movement as if they're one thing. But even when we just look at animal rights, there's very different beliefs and approaches in these different branches of the animal rights movement. And I agree with you, Tiana, and that and Zach. That's like really fascinating to get down into that complexity. Well, I might end there, and I'll say thank you to you guys for participating in the filming, and thank you to our readers and viewers, I should say. Thank you to the viewers of this video for being here today. Bye now.
For those of you watching, be sure to subscribe and follow us at Social Change UQ, and check out our website for more videos.